The year was 1947, and the winds swept mercilessly across the sun-scorched cliffs of Qumran, just northwest of the Dead Sea. The terrain was desolate, echoing a silence that had lasted for millennia. Amid this ancient wilderness, a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Dib wandered in search of a stray goat, unaware that his footsteps were about to disturb one of the greatest archaeological and spiritual discoveries of the 20th century. As he approached a small cave carved into the limestone cliffs, he hurled a stone inside. The sound that returned was not the expected thud of rock against dust, but a brittle, hollow crack. Curiosity drew him closer. What he found within its shadowed opening were clay jars, sealed and weathered by centuries, their contents hidden from human eyes for over 2,000 years. Inside the jars were scrolls, aged, fragmented, but unmistakably ancient. What began as a search for livestock quickly turned into a global religious and historical reckoning. The scrolls were soon handed off, traded, and finally brought to the attention of scholars. And when these scholars began to decipher the delicate ink lines, they realized they were peering into the deep past, into words written long before the birth of modern civilization. The initial reaction from academia was a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Could these really be ancient biblical manuscripts, or were they remnants of a forgotten sect? The parchment, written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, carried within it the weight of mystery. These were not mere documents. They were voices preserved in silence, spiritual echoes embedded in the limestone silence of desert caves. The caves of Qumran held not just scrolls, but a revelation. Some of the fragments mirrored the known texts of the Hebrew Bible. Others hinted at entirely different traditions, hymns, apocalyptic visions, communal rules, texts that felt simultaneously alien and sacred. The dry desert air had preserved them like holy embers, glowing faintly with the residue of a forgotten fire. This was not an ordinary archaeological find. This was a spiritual awakening cast in ink and parchment. It was as if the desert itself had chosen to open its lips and speak. As the scrolls emerged into the light of modernity, so too did questions that would challenge the very foundations of religious history. Who wrote these texts? Why were they hidden? And what truths lay sealed in clay for over 2 millennia? The journey had only just begun. What lay ahead was not only the decoding of ancient languages, but the unraveling of a mystery that could alter humanity's understanding of Scripture and the sacred. The voice from the cave was faint, but it had begun to speak. Beneath the jagged cliffs of Qumran, not far from the arid banks of the Dead Sea, there once dwelled a community unlike any other in the ancient world. These were the Essenes, mystics, scribes, and ascetics who chose isolation over influence, silence over spectacle. Withdrawing from the chaos of Jerusalem, they built a settlement marked by ritual purity, communal life, and a singular obsession, the sacred word. They left no grand temples, no imposing fortresses. Their legacy lay buried in caves, guarded not by walls, but by time and dust. What they preserved were scrolls, delicately inked reflections of divine thought, laboriously copied onto parchment and papyrus, then hidden in clay jars and tucked into the crevices of the earth. It was not accident, but intent. This was an archive of devotion, curated in the shadows. The act of concealment was not merely practical, it was prophetic. The Essenes lived during a period of intense upheaval, marked by foreign domination, sectarian conflict, and the looming threat of war. To them, Jerusalem had become corrupt, defiled by political compromise and priestly ambition. So they retreated, seeking to preserve a vision of faith untainted by power. In doing so, they forged a library not of books, but of revelation. Each scroll, each fragment, tells a story, not only of Scripture, but of scribes. The ink they used, often made of soot and gum, clung to the parchment like a prayer. The handwriting varied, yet the purpose remained steady, to transmit words believed to carry the breath of the divine. Some texts were copied with painstaking precision, suggesting a reverence not just for the content, but for the very letters themselves. Why hide such treasures? Perhaps it was fear that invading armies would desecrate what was sacred. Perhaps it was hope, a hope that in some distant future, a pure age would arise, one worthy of reclaiming these truths. Or perhaps it was faith, the kind that believed even buried wisdom would one day speak again. The jars themselves were unadorned, humble vessels of baked clay, but within them lay complexity and mystery. Community rules, scriptural commentaries, eschatological visions, they were not simply stored. They were entombed, as if the Essenes understood the weight of what they held. These texts were not for their time alone, but for a time beyond their own. It is no coincidence that many of the scrolls were found in Cave 4, located directly below the ruins of the Essene compound. It was as if the cliffs themselves had absorbed their knowledge, guarding it through centuries of wind and silence. And when at last the scrolls emerged, they revealed not only ancient words, but the soul of a forgotten people, devout, deliberate, and driven by a vision that transcended mortality. To write was to remember. To hide was to hope. And in their clay libraries, the Essenes carved out a legacy that even the tides of empire could not erase. When scholars first unfurled the brittle fragments from the caves of Qumran, their breath caught, not merely from the age of the documents, but from the words themselves. Before them lay echoes of the scriptures, familiar yet ancient beyond reckoning. The scrolls did not merely mirror the Bible as it is known today. They predated it, often by nearly 1,000 years, offering a glimpse into a textual world unshaped by centuries of translation, revision, and canonization. Among the most profound discoveries was the Great Isaiah Scroll, preserved nearly in its entirety. Written in Hebrew, its lines align closely with the book of Isaiah known today, yet subtle variations hint at a living tradition, not fixed but fluid, a sacred text still in motion. The scroll is more than a manuscript. It is a time capsule whispering of a moment when prophecy was not yet closed and interpretation was still a sacred act of community. Scattered alongside it were fragments from Genesis, recounting the origins of the world and the lineage of Israel with striking fidelity and occasional nuance. The Psalms, too, emerged, hymns of lament and praise, sorrow and joy that resonate with what was later canonized, yet also include unfamiliar verses. One such piece, sometimes called Psalm 151, proclaims the voice of David not found in the standard Masoretic text. In Psalm 1 verse 2, it is written, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night." This devotion echoes throughout the scrolls, even in those texts deemed apocryphal. For it was not only canonical books that the caves preserved. There were writings long excluded from the traditional Bible, yet held in high esteem by those who copied and read them. Texts such as the Book of Enoch, once influential, but later cast into obscurity, recount cosmic visions, angelic rebellions, and divine judgment. These writings, while absent from Jewish and most Christian Bibles, were considered sacred by many early communities. Another startling inclusion was the Book of Jubilees, a retelling of Genesis and Exodus with chronological precision and theological depth. In these apocryphal texts, the line between scripture and commentary, between inspiration and interpretation, becomes blurred. They do not merely supplement the Bible, they challenge it, reframe it, and at times deepen it. What does it mean that ancient Israelites revered these texts? That a scribe in a desert cave found the vision of Enoch or the structure of Jubilees worthy of meticulous transcription? The scrolls invite a reconsideration of what it meant for a text to be sacred in the ancient world. The lines of canon were not yet drawn in ink, and the boundaries of the Bible were still porous. And yet, the scrolls do not undermine Scripture. They enrich it. They reveal a tradition far more dynamic, a faith engaged in constant conversation with its past, its God, and its own evolving identity. These are not lost books. They are remembered voices brought back into the light. Hidden among the clay jars of Qumran was a scroll unlike any other, a stark departure from the hymns, laws, and prophetic visions that filled the caves. Known today as the War Scroll, this text does not sing of creation or psalms of comfort. Instead, it rages with the voice of battle. A cosmic war unfolds within its lines, pitting two absolute forces against one another, the sons of light and the sons of darkness. This scroll is both blueprint and prophecy, strategy and theology. It outlines a detailed military campaign, tactics, formations, trumpets, banners, and blessings, presented not as historical record, but as divine inevitability. The conflict it describes spans 7 battles, culminating in a final, decisive victory for the forces of light. It is not merely a human war. It is a war waged with angelic legions and spiritual power, where righteousness and wickedness are the true adversaries. The imagery is vivid. Priests anoint warriors with sacred oil. Trumpets sound commands, each with symbolic significance. Banners flutter with inscriptions of holy names. Swords clash beneath invocations of divine justice. Every move, every cry, is choreographed in holy precision. The war is not just against foreign armies, but against evil itself, embodied in the sons of darkness, figures often identified with foreign oppressors, but also with cosmic chaos. Who were these sons of light? The scroll never names the Essenes directly, yet all signs point to them. In this apocalyptic vision, they saw themselves as warriors of the final age, chosen by God to purify the world. Their isolation was not passive. It was preparation. Their strict adherence to purity laws, their withdrawal from corrupted religious systems, and their obsession with prophetic texts all align with the worldview of a people awaiting war, not of politics, but of destiny. The War Scroll reveals more than a fascination with violence. It exposes the deep fears and fierce hopes of a community that believed history was coming to a climax. They were a people oppressed, marginalized by dominant powers, and yet certain that divine intervention would soon reverse the order of things. Their enemies would fall, and the faithful remnant would reign in justice. This is where the scroll intersects with early eschatology. The notion of an end-time conflict, a final judgment, a purging of the wicked, these are themes that later echo in Christian apocalyptic texts, including the Book of Revelation. Could the War Scroll have influenced such visions? Or does it reflect a broader current of apocalyptic expectation sweeping through Judea in the 1st century BC? Perhaps most intriguing is the scroll's silence on a single messianic leader. Instead, leadership is shared between priests, warriors, and angelic forces. This may suggest a different understanding of salvation, one grounded in community rather than individual deliverance. Or it may hint at a messianic hope so sacred it could only be whispered. What is clear is this: the War Scroll is not mere fantasy. It is faith turned into battle plans, longing etched in military code. It is a cry from the desert, from those who saw themselves as soldiers of the sacred, awaiting the dawn when darkness would fall and the light would rise. Among the fractured scrolls of Qumran, one figure appears again and again, veiled in mystery, yet central to the community's vision of divine truth. He is referred to as the teacher of righteousness, a title more than a name, a presence more than a person. His identity remains elusive, but his influence reverberates across multiple texts, shaping theology, law, and the very purpose of the sect's existence. Was he a prophet sent to interpret the will of God in a time of apostasy? A priest anointed to purify worship from the corruption of Jerusalem's temple? Or was he something more, a messianic precursor, a harbinger of the age to come? The scrolls never say directly, yet they offer fragments of clarity. He is portrayed as the one who understands the hidden things of the law, the one to whom God reveals the mysteries of his will. The Pesharim, or scriptural commentaries, frequently reference the teacher, interpreting biblical prophecy as being fulfilled in his life and mission. To the community, he was the righteous interpreter of divine truth, the one who unveiled the true meaning behind sacred texts. He was opposed, even persecuted, by a rival, referred to cryptically as the wicked priest, perhaps a figure of high authority in Jerusalem, now cast in the role of adversary. But the Qumran texts speak of more than one chosen figure. In several scrolls, there emerges a dual expectation: two messiahs, one priestly, one kingly. This diverges sharply from both mainstream Jewish messianism, which typically envisions a single Davidic redeemer, and Christian tradition, which centers on a singular divine Messiah. At Qumran, salvation is not consolidated in one man, but distributed across roles, priest and prince, intercessor and warrior. This dual Messiah concept may reflect the community's longing for both spiritual purification and political deliverance. The Messiah of Aaron would sanctify worship, restore lawful order, and uphold divine instruction. The Messiah of Israel, on the other hand, would wield authority, perhaps even military strength, to lead the faithful into the eschatological age. The balance between the two reveals a vision of redemption that is both internal and external, spiritual and societal. Threaded through these messianic themes is a distinct language of mysticism. In the Hariyat, or Thanksgiving hymns, the writer, possibly the teacher himself, describes ecstatic encounters with divine knowledge, moments of luminous clarity granted by God. These hymns speak not of dogma, but of experience, of trembling before hidden glory, of being drawn into the secret counsels of the Most High. The mysticism of Qumran was not abstract. It was grounded in law, in ritual, in the purity of heart and body. It fused discipline with transcendence, intellect with awe. It envisioned the faithful not merely as followers of commandments, but as vessels of divine revelation. The teacher of righteousness, in this light, becomes both model and mediator, one who walked ahead, and one who drew others into the sacred unknown. This blend of mystical vision and legal rigor sets the Qumran sect apart. It offers a glimpse into an early spirituality that defies modern categories, one where the mystical was inseparable from the moral, and messianic hope was plural, prophetic, and profoundly personal. From the moment the Dead Sea Scrolls emerged into the public eye, they ignited not only scholarly fascination, but also a storm of suspicion. Whispers of secrets buried too deep, of truths too dangerous for daylight, began to circulate. For decades, much of the collection remained unpublished, locked behind layers of institutional control, raising a singular and settling question: what was being hidden? The early custodians of the scrolls were a small, tightly knit circle of scholars, many of them connected to ecclesiastical institutions. Access was limited, dissemination slow. While some delays were due to the delicate nature of restoration and interpretation, others pointed to an opaque academic culture. In the shadows of this secrecy, theories began to thrive. Some claimed the scrolls contained revelations that could shatter the foundations of Christianity. Others speculated that church authorities sought to bury any text, suggesting that Jesus was not unique in his teachings, or that the roots of Christianity were far more intertwined with radical Jewish sects like the Essenes than previously admitted. These allegations gained traction not because of proof, but because of silence. The public grew impatient. What were these texts that scholars hesitated to release? Were there scrolls that named the Messiah directly? Did they contradict New Testament doctrine? Could the teacher of righteousness, discussed in previous chapters, be a veiled allusion to Jesus, or a contemporary rival with strikingly similar teachings? These questions may never be answered fully, and yet they reveal the core of the tension. The scrolls do not align neatly with any single religious tradition. Their theology is both familiar and alien. Their vision of the end times, their dual messiahs, their mystical devotion, all of it challenges conventional categories. In 1991, the scholarly monopoly finally broke. Under increasing pressure, the Israel Antiquities Authority and other custodians released high-resolution images and microfilms of the scrolls to the broader academic community. The gates of secrecy opened, and with them, a flood of analysis began. Yet the decades of silence had already seeded a cultural mythology, one in which the scrolls were not just ancient texts, but forbidden knowledge. Much of what was feared turned out to be less conspiratorial and more complex. There were no scrolls naming Jesus directly, no verses that erased his significance, nor revelations that debunked Christian doctrine outright. But what did emerge was something more subtle and perhaps more unsettling. A picture of a religious world in ferment, one where apocalyptic visionaries, mystics, and law keepers all vied for divine truth. A world not of tidy doctrines, but of competing revelations. For traditional theology, both Jewish and Christian, the scrolls pose difficult questions. They force a reckoning with the diversity of early belief. They reveal that the soil from which faith grew was far less uniform than once thought. And they suggest that what we now call orthodoxy was once a contested, evolving process. So, were there truths the Church didn't want you to see? Perhaps not in the form of a cover-up, but in the deeper sense, a discomfort with complexity, a resistance to ambiguity, a fear that certainty might fracture in the presence of ancient paradox. The scrolls do not destroy faith. They demand a more daring one. Between the close of the Hebrew Scriptures and the emergence of the New Testament lies a chasm historians have long struggled to span. This interval, often referred to as the 400 silent years, was anything but silent. It was a time of political unrest, spiritual searching, and theological experimentation, a period whose echoes may now be heard in the scrolls of Qumran. The Dead Sea Scrolls, preserved by a community removed from the mainstream currents of Second Temple Judaism, offer a rare window into this turbulent age. Their voices rise from the fissure between testaments, filling the silence not with finality, but with fervent anticipation. In these texts, we do not find the birth of Christianity, but we find its soil rich, disturbed, and alive with expectation. One of the most striking connections lies in messianic language. The scrolls speak of deliverers to come, some priestly, others kingly, and all imbued with divine authority. This dual Messiah concept may shed new light on the expectations that permeated first-century Judea, expectations that the Gospels reflect in the tensions between Jesus as teacher, prophet, high priest, and suffering king. The Qumran community anticipated a teacher of righteousness who would interpret divine law and prepare the way. This vision bears an uncanny resemblance to the role later ascribed to John the Baptist, who also lived in the desert, called for purification, and proclaimed the nearness of divine intervention. The scrolls also echo the purity codes that appear throughout the Gospels and the epistles of the New Testament. Ritual washing, strict observance of the law, and separation from a corrupt religious establishment, these themes course through the writings at Qumran, just as they do in the early Christian movement. The mikvot, or ritual baths found at the Essenes site, parallel the symbolic and sacramental practice of baptism. This was not imitation, but convergence, evidence that both communities drank from the same spiritual currents. Further, the communal structure of the Essenes, rooted in shared meals, renunciation of wealth, and obedience to a teacher, prefigures the earliest Christian assemblies. In the Acts of the Apostles, believers are described as having everything in common, breaking bread together in unity. These were not novel inventions, but reflections of a pre-existing ideal. The scrolls suggest that Christianity may not have emerged in isolation, but as a bold reinterpretation of existing patterns. Even the apocalyptic tone that defines so much of early Christian literature finds a strong counterpart in Qumran. The longing for divine justice, the imminent expectation of judgment, the dichotomy between light and darkness, all of these resound in both traditions. The sons of light, familiar from the war scroll, stand beside the children of the day in Paul's letters. This shared symbolic language points to a world alive with theological crosscurrents. Yet the scrolls do not confirm Christian claims, nor do they disprove them. They do something subtler. They contextualize them. They place Jesus, John, and the apostles within a vibrant, contested religious landscape, a world in which ideas were in motion, Scripture was in flux, and messianic hope burned bright. The New Testament no longer appears as an abrupt beginning, but as a continuation of themes already forming, fermenting, and finding voice in the desert. If the Old Testament laid the foundation, and the New Testament built upon it, then the Dead Sea Scrolls are the bridge, a passage paved by prophets unrecognized, by scribes forgotten, and by a community who believed their writings would endure. They did. And they now call us to see not a break between covenants, but a sacred continuity. The caves of Qumran have long fallen silent, yet their message continues to reverberate through the halls of universities, the pews of churches, and the hearts of seekers around the world. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was not a mere academic event. It was a spiritual and intellectual awakening that continues to unfold, layer by layer, word by word. In the decades since their unveiling, the scrolls have revolutionized the field of biblical scholarship. They have provided scholars with manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible over 1,000 years older than any previously known, allowing for precise comparisons between ancient versions and illuminating how sacred texts evolved over time. The meticulous copying, the textual variations, and the unexpected insertions have deepened the understanding of how the biblical canon was shaped, not by single strokes, but through generations of scribes, interpreters, and communities in dialogue with the divine. But beyond academia, the scrolls have sparked spiritual renewal. For many, they offer a sense of connection to the earliest roots of faith, a glimpse into a time when Scripture was still alive in the hands of those who wrote and preserved it with trembling devotion. The realization that ancient believers, long before the rise of institutional religion, wrestled with questions of purity, prophecy, and messianic hope has drawn modern readers into a deeper, more personal engagement with their own beliefs. The scrolls have also reshaped how archaeology interacts with faith. No longer is the biblical world merely the subject of excavation. It has become a conversation partner, challenged and enriched by the physical remains of those who lived it. The scrolls have shifted paradigms. They have turned the wilderness into a witness, the desert into a dialogue. Technological breakthroughs have played a vital role in this continuing revelation. Multispectral imaging, infrared photography, and digital reconstruction now allow scholars to read fragments once thought illegible. Faded lines reappear. Lost words are reclaimed. New texts emerge from the ashes of time, extending the scroll's reach into the present. One by one, pieces fall into place, like shards of a forgotten mosaic slowly restored to form. The digital age has also democratized the scrolls. What was once hidden behind scholarly walls is now accessible to anyone with a screen and a search bar. High-resolution images of the scrolls are freely available online, inviting not only theologians, but artists, poets, and everyday believers to engage with these ancient voices. The scrolls have become a shared inheritance, no longer the province of the few, but a gift for the many. And yet, their full message remains unfinished. The scrolls continue to speak, but not in conclusions. They speak in tensions and open-ended prayers, in the fragile ink of seekers who knew that truth must be both preserved and pursued. They remind us that faith is not static. It is a scroll still being written. The world has changed since 1947, but the questions remain. Who are we in light of the sacred? What do we do with revelation that both comforts and unsettles? And are we willing to listen to voices that waited 2,000 years to be heard? The sun still casts long shadows over the cliffs of Qumran. Wind still traces the same paths through the silent gullies, whispering over stones untouched for centuries. The caves stand quiet now, emptied of their clay jars, stripped of their scrolls, but not of their meaning. For what once lay hidden in darkness has become a voice. And that voice, though ancient, still calls. It calls not in shouts, but in echoes. Echoes of scribes hunched over parchment by flickering lamplight. Echoes of prayers carried into the desert by a people who believed that truth must be preserved, even at the edge of the world. Echoes of warning, of wonder, of waiting. What began as fragments retrieved from the earth has become a message that pierces time itself. The Dead Sea Scrolls are no longer just archaeological marvels. They are spiritual artifacts, bearing not only ink but intention. Each letter etched in haste or reverence speaks of a yearning deeper than doctrine, a hunger for God that transcends history. The Qumran community did not seek recognition. They sought to be faithful. And in their silence, they created a legacy that would outlast empires. This discovery is not simply a tale of desert wanderings or monastic isolation. It is a reckoning, a moment in which our inherited understandings of Scripture, history, and faith are drawn into sharper focus. The scrolls do not dictate what to believe. They compel us to question, to seek, to remember that sacred truth is often clothed in mystery, and that its guardians are sometimes those who choose obscurity over acclaim. What do we do now that we have heard the voice from the caves? Do we dismiss it as relic, or do we receive it as revelation? Do we relegate these scrolls to museums and footnotes, or do we let their words reframe our understanding of what it means to live faithfully in a fractured world? For in the end, the scrolls are not about the past. They are about the present, about the eternal pull between light and darkness, between compromise and conviction, between forgetfulness and remembrance. The Essenes wrote for their time, but also for a time beyond theirs, for a generation who would rediscover their words and find in them a mirror, a challenge, and a calling. The clay has broken. The parchment has spoken. And though the scribes are long gone, their voices still linger, soft, insistent, unforgotten. The truth they guarded has not vanished. It has risen, and if we listen, truly listen, we may find that the caves of Qumran, though emptied, are not silent after all. They are still echoing. You have journeyed with us through windswept deserts, into forgotten caves, and across the fragile ink of ancient scrolls. Together, we've uncovered mysteries buried for centuries, fragments of scripture, whispers of lost wisdom, and the deep yearning of a people who dared to preserve what was sacred, even when the world turned away. If this exploration has stirred something within you, questions, wonder, or a desire to know more, don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking explorations into history, faith, and the enduring power of the sacred. If you found this film meaningful, like the video. It helps others discover these stories and brings more light to forgotten truths. Leave a comment below and share your reflections. What part of the Dead Sea Scrolls surprised or moved you most? Your thoughts deepen the dialogue. And most importantly, share this film with those you care about. The scrolls were hidden for 2,000 years. Now that their voice has returned, let it be heard.